Hey guys, Cam McClellan, welcome to today's Wealth Wad. I'm here with Michael Beresford. Michael's one of my business partners. He's also the Senior Investment Consultant at Open Wealth Creation. That being said, Michael's probably one of the rare individuals that I turn to for a second opinion when it comes to property investing. His analytics and the depth that he goes to in understanding the process of investing is phenomenal. So I've asked Michael to come in today because investing and duplication really comes down to control. Now, control comes down to knowledge of finance structure and the bank panel valuation and the mortgagee's valuation process. Once you understand those two things, it really allows you to duplicate at a lot faster rate and doesn't put those handbrakes on when you come to buying your third and fourth property. So understanding the process is a key, and I want Michael to give you a full rundown on how to control that process and why it's important, and not take the easy way out and just do the old cross-collateralisation.
Yeah, great.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Cam. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to cover two main things today. Firstly, it's important to understand that while it does come down to control, we can't actually control the process itself. We can't change the way that the banks value properties, but what we can do is make sure that we're fully informed. And when Cam talks about control, that's what we're talking about. Controlling the fact that we can get that full disclosure of the process. It's also about digging deep to understand what the best combination of lender and valuer in any particular market and location is based on the expertise of the valuers in those locations. Now that sounds quite detailed, and it is, but that's the kind of digging that's necessary to allow you to build a portfolio. Because most banks are great, and anyone that's been into a bank branch, I'm sure will vouch for this, most banks are great at setting up a home loan. And if you're looking at one investment property, they can probably help you with that, because they'll say that they'll give you a discount on the interest rate, and they'll tell you that they'll save you a bunch of bank fees. That sounds fantastic, but your own home security and you're cross-collateralised. Now, for those of you that have seen our Finance 101 video in the blog section of our website, you'll be familiar with this. Really quick recap for those that haven't. What cross-collateralisation is using an existing asset as security against another asset. So let's say that here is most people's own home. They have a mortgage on that property, they have some great equity in that property, and they want to use that equity to bring over here to cover deposit and costs on an investment. Now, the way that the bank will typically do that is that if you find this property, you go back to the original bank. Let's say it's ANZ, because they stitched me up 10 years ago with this exact same thing. What they will do is they'll value the existing property and not tell you what it's worth. They'll do exactly the same over here, but they'll say, yeah, no worries, Cam, based on the equity that you and Felicity have, we'll lend you the money for the investment property, provided that you own home security against that investment. Now, that's a good and a bad outcome. It's a great outcome in that you're using equity to build your portfolio and not letting equity be lazy equity. The issue from a risk perspective is that if anything were to happen to you or to this property, the easiest way that the bank is going to get their money is going to be to sell your own home first thing on Monday morning for 50 grand less than what it's worth, just so they can recoup their costs. Now, obviously, that's not a great outcome. So from a security perspective, we want to avoid cross-collateralisation. Now there's a quick recap on what cross-collateralisation is and why we want to avoid it from a security perspective. The other reason that we want to avoid it is because that all of the control and the power in this process is with the bank. We want that decision-making process to be with us. So as a result of the GFC, because banks love control as well, let's be honest, a vast majority of all of the lending institutions in Australia utilise the VALEX process for the valuations. So each bank, ANZ in this case, pre-GFC would have had 4 or 5 valuers. You could have got all of those out to your place, taken the best valuation and borrowed equity against that valuation. Slightly different now. The reason being is that with the financial crisis, the lending pot in Australia went from about $7 trillion to $1.1 trillion. So if you think about that, if you had $7 in your pocket and someone wanted to borrow some money, you'd be a little bit more liberal than if you had $1.10 in your pocket and someone was wanting to borrow some money. So the banks have just added a smoke screen or a layer in here where they can control the valuation process, because what VALEX is, stands for Valuation Exchange, and they're an intermediary that randomly assigns any incoming valuation request to one of the panel of valuers. So you do get some variability, guys. You don't know whether the person valuing the property's lived in the suburb that your property is for the last 20 years and has a lot of experience, or whether they're from the other side of town and they're 2 weeks out of uni. You don't know. So we do get variability. Using some round numbers, let's say that the investment property here is 400,000 as a purchase price. The best case scenario is that the bank valuation will come back at contract price, because the bank will lend you 90% of that, which is 360, and when you add that to the money that you've taken from equity to cover deposit and costs, you've got the finance for the property, no problem. The common scenario is obviously the banks will be conservative. As investors, we want buffers. Banks are no different. So again, it's a bit hard to be filthy on them for having that, but worst case generally will be a valuation 10% under contract price, which in this case is 360. Now, they'll lend 90% against their valuation, which is 324,000 in this example. So, in this example here, you're actually $36,000 short on meeting finance for the property. Okay. Now, importantly, it doesn't mean that your price has gone up by 36,000, because you're getting 36,000 less from the 90% lend here, which just means that you need to top it up from the existing equity that you have in the existing asset. Okay, so the actual amount that you borrowed doesn't change. It's a really important point to understand. But if we revisit this, guys, before I took you through the VALEX process and how it works, we had the bank valuing an existing property, valuing a new property, not telling you what they were worth, and making one security against the other. The bank is in control of that process. Under this process here, we find out what the bank valuation has come back at. Based on that, we know how much they'll lend us. And based on that, we know what the shortfall is, if any, that we need to contribute to cover the shortfall in the bank valuation. Now, importantly, we are making the decisions as part of this process here. Okay? Remember, this process is exactly the same. It's just when they're cross-collateralized, the bank will make the executive decision to spend 36,000 extra of your money to cover the shortfall. So to summarize, it's really important to be in control and getting full disclosure as to the valuation process. We can't change it, but it's important that we know what's happening, because if you do this, that makes the first investment property acquisition really, really easy. You get a low interest rate, no fees, and you get your money in a week and a half. What happens though, 18 months down the track, when you want to get the next investment, and you don't realise that the bank spent 36 extra of your money in the process first time around? I've got a kit bag of stories, but this is just one of them to show how understanding what banks value a property at any point in time is fundamental, because again, real wealth is not created by having one investment property. It's a process that we need to duplicate and repeat, and fundamental to that is understanding what a bank thinks the property's worth at any point in time.
This seems pretty passionate to you, mate. So you mentioned before that you used ANZ because this is an example, and I know that we've talked about this, and this number sort of stands out to me. So this wouldn't happen to be a personal example of what happened.
It is a personal experience. So I bought my first investment when I was 25. About 2 years later, went to buy my second one, and a good mate of mine said, "I'll go and see my guy at the ANZ. He'll get you a discount on the rate." I remember it vividly. I went and did that. I asked for a copy of the bank val. He gave me the front page without the comparable sales. And as a result, I got my money and the service was pretty good. It wasn't until 18 months later when I thought I had some additional equity in the portfolio. I went to establish that equity loan to get property number 3.
Yep.
And ANZ to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, Michael, you've got no room to move." And I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, well, here are my debt statements, here are my comparable sales. And all they said to me was, what you think the property's worth and what we think the properties are worth are two different things.
Yeah.
So I knew straight away that I had to be understanding what they thought the property was worth. So I knew exactly how much equity I had in any property at any point in time.
So what's the rationale of a fair market val versus a bank panel val, and why did they think it was different? What's their rationale what's the description of the two different valuations?
Yeah, cool. So a fair market valuation is pretty much what the property could sell for on the market in a 60 to 90 day window. So it's pretty close to a realistic appraisal that a real estate agent might give you. The bank valuation, or the scientific term being mortgage security purposes, is simply what the bank is willing to lend against. So it's not necessarily a true reflection of what the property's worth. It's just how much they're willing to use as security. So if I use an example from just a couple of weeks ago, we had a client who had a property of certain dimension valued by a valuer at contract price. And about 3 weeks after that, the same valuer, not just the same company, but the actual same person, valued another property of exactly the same dimension, 30,000 under. And so I went back to that valuer and I said, can you help me understand this? You've put this one at contract price and signed off on it. Yeah. This one's 30,000 different, but it's exactly the same. And the insight was amazing. What he said to me was, I got so much grief from the lenders, mortgage insurers, about putting a valuation at contract price that it's just easier for me to avoid the hassle and put it 30,000 under so they don't ask questions.
Yeah, if you think about the amount a bank panel valuer is paid to do a valuation, they're only paid a couple $100 per valuation. It's their business is a sausage factory. They just turn them out. So for them, in that instance, it's easier for them to put a valuation that's lower and not get asked questions, and they can go and do some more valuations rather than have to deal with an issue. So yeah,
and ultimately what it comes down to is buffers. So we talk to our clients, I'm sure you and Felicity have them, Beck and I have them, we have buffers to make sure that we've got a rainy day fund per property, if you like. As I said before, banks are no different. So whether it's the bank or the lender's mortgage insurer, they just want some peace of mind and a buffer where there's some room to move. So they're generally a bit conservative. Yeah.
Guys, I hope this has shed a bit of insight onto what the bank panel process is when it comes to valuations currently, and by understanding it, getting the right structure set up, which is going to allow you to duplicate or at least know your position.
That's it.
And that's the main thing.
Hope you enjoyed it, guys.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for watching.
Cheers, guys.
See ya.